Hey everyone, my name is Jill Barrett. I have a business called The Head Coach, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this coaching session, Create a Winning CV for Blanchardstown Library. But first up, 2 words, 7 seconds. So there it is, that's 7 seconds up, and they say that's the average amount of time that it will take a recruiter to decide as to whether you're going to be brought forward to interview or left, as we say, on the subs bench. So that's a pretty short amount of time. So today in our session, we want to give you some tips to make sure that you are in that selection process from the get-go and be able to put together a fantastic CV. So I'm going to share my screen with you now, and we're going to have a look at the general pointers that I would offer in terms of creating that winning CV. So what will we cover? First up, we're going to look at content headings, so the signpost, which will bring your reader through your experience, both in terms of your experience at educational level and also in your employment and also in your life in general. Secondly, layout and format, remembering that this is a really key point in terms of presenting your information. You don't just want to have the information there, you want to have it in a very readable and clear format. Thirdly, we're going to look at skills. So how you present your skills and your experience to date. And we're going to talk a little bit about numbers. And you might be thinking, well, why would I worry about numbers if I'm not going for an accounting role? But numbers and evidence is really important to have on your CV. And the last thing we're going to look at is how to make that CV stand out. So how will you stand out amongst all the other candidates that are going for that particular job? Before we go into the detail, however, just a couple of overall points. The first thing is that ideally in length, your CV should be maximum 2 pages. Some jurisdictions like a 1-page CV, and for academic CVs, we know they might run to 5, 6, 7 pages. But today we're just talking about the average CV and the one that is, if you like, our tried and tested. So 2 pages, you should be able to express yourself succinctly and clearly in that length of time. Also, in terms of the information within it, really make sure that the information is relevant to the reader and also prioritized in order of relevance to the reader. We all know we're looking at our devices all the time, phones, tablets, on our laptop, we're scrolling through feeds. If we don't see something we like, we just move on to the next thing. The reader of your CV is no different. If they don't see what they're interested in, what's engaging, what's relevant to the job that they have on offer, you've lost them. You need to keep them on board from the get-go. If you have a job spec, it's really important, obviously, to read that and make sure that everything in your CV and your cover letter reflects back what's in the job spec. After all, it is what the recruiter is looking to when he's considering or she's considering whether to bring you forward to interview. They must rate your CV against that job spec. So make sure that it follows the content. Also, if you're sending out what we call a speculative application, so there is no job per se that you know of, but you're sending in your CV, do your research on the company, the people working within it, and anything about that company in the news. So looking at the website as well, looking at any projects that they're involved in, and also getting in touch with people in the company to find out what it's like to work for, the type of people that they look for, so that you can reflect that as best as possible in that speculative CV. So bearing all that in mind, looking at the content first, so content headings. So personal details, statement, I have here refer to template. At the end of this session, you'll see a reference to my email address and my LinkedIn profile. By all means, connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out on my email and ask me to send you a copy of my template. I'll be really happy to do that. Skills, education, employment, interests and achievements, and referees. So those are the headings we're going to look at. Personal details, your name should be the most prominent piece of information on your CV, so it should be standing out nice and clear and bold at the top of the page. An address, if you don't want to put in your full address, at the very least, put in your county and your country. Full address, you should feel comfortable, hopefully, to put that in. This is a confidential setting after all. It's only between you and the recruiter who'll be recruiting you eventually, hopefully, anyway. So it's good to put an address in so that they have a location for you. Secondly, in terms of number, your telephone number, make sure that you just put one number on your CV. It shouldn't be a guessing game as to which one to use to contact you. Also, in terms of that number, make sure that you're reachable on it and make sure you have a professional voicemail. Or if you have to leave your phone with somebody for a period of time and they'll be taking a message for you, make sure that person is very reliable. Nothing worse than finding out after the event that the interview has taken place and somebody didn't pass you on a message. So make sure, again, that you can be reached easily and that somebody professional will be picking up the call and your voicemail is professional. The last piece, in terms of your email, make sure that your email address is professional. That might seem obvious for those of us that might be just coming out of school or going into college. Maybe you have sort of a fun address. It's time to change it to a professional one for going into a professional sphere. And if you have a LinkedIn profile, by all means, put your LinkedIn URL there and make sure through LinkedIn that you can edit that profile so that it just appears as your name. So initially, when you set up a LinkedIn profile, you'll get your name and a little bit of code as your URL, and you can delete the code and just have it as your first name and last name. The second piece is the statement. Now, this is optional, but it is recommended, and it's increasingly popular in CVs today. You might call it a personal summary, a professional summary, a career objective, or a professional statement, perhaps, something like that. Whatever you call it, this is just a paragraph of narrative. It highlights your values, your interests, your achievements, your personality, your skills, and your goals, and makes it and them specific to the company you're applying to and or the role you're applying for. So this is a statement that helps to distinguish you above other candidates, a little bit about yourself and your highlights, again, which makes the recruiter want to know more about you. So yes, you will have a cover letter with your CV in most cases, unless they've absolutely stated that they don't want one. But this is an extra hook, if you like. It's particularly important for career changers, because if you're changing career or you're taking a job just as something to get by whilst you're waiting for that big break, that role that is taking you in, the best fit direction of your career, it's particularly important because it helps the employer or the recruiter make sense of why you're sending in a CV if it doesn't seem terribly relevant to the job on offer, in terms of the content of your education and your employment experience to date. The next thing that we'll look at is skills. So a skills section is really important. Again, highlighting to the employer the skills that you have that are relevant to the role. So simply you might put in things like your driving license, for example, and the status of it. So ideally full and clean. Languages, so any languages that you have and any proficiency in those languages. If English is not your first language, really important to state that your English is fluent, if it is, but we'll assume that it is, so your English is fluent, and state that on the CV. Don't assume the employer will take that as a given, and you can highlight whatever is your native or your mother tongue. And any languages that you put down, be those English or otherwise, just to make sure that you put in your level of proficiency there. For your IT skills, don't be afraid to state the obvious. So if you are familiar with MS Office Suite, state MS Office Suite, including Word, PowerPoint, Excel, whatever packages you're familiar with, and things like your internet usage, your social media, and so on. Another thing that you might put in are your training and qualifications. So they could be everything outside of mainstream education that you've done that would be relevant to the role. Again, relevance is key. And it might include, very simply, things like first aid and manual handling. Every employer will have to put you through those courses. So when they've done that, they're valid for a period of time. So if a prospective employer can see that you've done those relatively recently, well, it's good news for them, because it means they don't have to invest the money that it takes to put you through those courses when they employ you first. So it can be an added bonus to your skills section. Another thing that you can put in is obviously your technical qualifications. So anything that will indicate to the employer that you have skills very specific to your area. So they might be laboratory skills if you're going into a science field, or engineering, some sort of technical packages that you might know, or even if you're applying for something in the culinary area in a kitchen, for example, even the fact that you have a HACCP qualification. All of those things are really important, so they can go in your skills section. And then moving on to education. So education, again, and one thing I will say as an adjunct to this is just don't worry too much about the order of your sections. It's really important that they're all there, and certainly personal state or details and your statement should appear first up, and interests and achievements and your referees last. But the skills, education, and employment, try and always think again, which of these sections are most relevant to the reader? So the education, always, if possible, reverse chronological, so most recent first. But if you feel that something you did years ago is more relevant to the job you're going for now, you might want to put that first. So you might actually put it in chronological order, so the oldest first, going back to the most recent. So if you're doing that with your education, just remember to keep the same sort of pattern and format for your employment section. Otherwise, it can be confusing. So with education, nice clear layout, the dates you attended, just the brief dates. It can be years or just an abbreviation of months and years. The name of your course, and be very clear and concise about your name. So make sure that you have the accurate name for your course, the accurate name, and a brief address for the educational institution in which you pursued that course. Your award expected or achieved, or your grade average to date, whichever applies. And then include some subjects. So either include the most relevant and or the ones you did really well in. But ideally, the most relevant are the ones that you will focus on because they are going to be the ones that the reader is interested in. So we might be proud of our achievements in other subjects, but remember that relevance is key. The other thing that you might do is include assignments or a dissertation if it, again, is really relevant to the role. Okay, so we want to, again, keep the focus on relevant information that's prioritized in order of interest to the reader. Employment, exactly the same. So with the employment section, you need to make sure that the information, again, is clear, ideally in reverse chronological, unless you've gone the opposite with your education. And there is a caveat to that, which I'll come to in a moment. But with the employment section, again, the dates you were there, abbreviated, the title that you held, the name of the organization, a brief address, and then a bullet pointed list with good action verbs and phrases in it of the responsibilities you held, always putting the focus on what's most relevant to the job and or the most senior experience that you got in that role. So relevance and seniority should go together in terms of how you present that information. So again, I did say reverse chronological, ideally. What you might think though is that, oh gosh, a job I did years ago is actually more relevant to the job I'm applying for at the moment. I'd love to be able to put that up front, ideally. So you can do that because you can divide your employment into two headings or subheadings. One is most relevant and the other is other. And what that allows you to do is to put the spotlight on the jobs that you want the potential employer or recruiter to pay attention to most. So most relevant and other. Within those subheadings, though, it's really important to keep a pattern of, again, chronological or reverse chronological. Don't have the information all over the place, as it were. The next section is interests and achievements. So interests and achievements, some people don't bother putting this in at all. And for me, as somebody who recruits from time to time, I've sat on panels, and as well as somebody who has struggled in interviews from time to time, you know, got a little bit tense or stressed during interviews. And a good interviewer will take you to the interest and achievement section to help you to relax back into the interview, to talk about things that are really of interest to you and what you do in your spare time. So it's a good thing to have there for that reason, because it helps the interviewer to get you back into the groove, as it were, if you're struggling during the interview, perhaps with competencies or technical questions. But in addition, recruiters just like to see that you have aspects of yourself that are above and beyond study and work. They like to see the holistic view of you, and to think that if you're going to be working with a client or going out with your team, that you're going to be able to relate to them at a very human level and know a little bit about the world. So really important. What might you focus on? They love to see things like volunteering, community work, and also any professional interests that you might have related to your career. And also things like sport and any leadership positions that you held. Achievements also, if you've won some awards, even Employee of the Month or something like that, or scholarships, you could put those in there. If you don't feel you have a lot of achievements, by all means, just leave that at interests. And the last section then, really important again, referees. Some of us will just put referees' details available on request. I would say, and I would counsel, only do that if you're really out of space. Otherwise, make an effort to put in the details for at least 2 referees, people that would do a better job of selling you to a potential employer than you would do yourself. Important that you have their permission, and also that if they granted you permission a while ago, that you do contact them every time literally every time you send out your CV, but every period of time that you'll be sending out your CVs in. So if you're applying for a job over the next couple of months, put a call in and just remind them that you're there. You don't want them, at a loss for words when somebody rings them, trying to struggle to think about the last time they spoke to you. So really important that you put in also their name, their title, a brief address again, and a telephone number and or email address that they can be reached by. By putting the referee's details on the CV, you're making it very easy for the recruiter to hire you. You're also de facto giving them permission to contact the referees, so make sure that you're happy to do that. A lot of employers will contact you anyway when it comes to interview stage and ask if it's okay for them to contact your referees, but my thought is always to just make sure that you're happy with that and put their details down there. And the reason being that there's a lot of candidates in a very competitive field. If somebody has referees on, and I am going to be able to perhaps pick up the phone to them even before we start the interview process or start the selection process, just to see, look, what's this candidate made of? Then I'd love to be able to do that. And why do employers do that? Employment and recruitment is a really costly business. I don't want to get all the way to the end of a multi-stage interview process and recruitment process, assessment centres perhaps, the initial vetting and so on, only to come to the end of that process and discover when I'm offering the candidate the job that the referees are not non-committal, they're not enthusiastic. This person might have been fine, but they're certainly not the stellar person on the job that I might have thought they presented themselves to be. So again, really important with the referees. Make sure if they're going to do a great job of selling you, that they have you have their permission to put the details down, and that you're comfortable that an employer will contact them. So layout and format, really important. We do what's called the arm's length test. So, Fiona Jenkins on the left here, you can say, well, that looks a bit pretty. There's a nice little photo or image up the right-hand side. But really, it looks a very basic CV, something that you might expect from somebody sort of in maybe transition year in school. A lot of white space, not a lot of detailed content, and certainly not selling the candidate to the best effect. Margins are huge, just loads of white space on the page. Look at the other one then here, Jerry Lee, and a really nice layout, really succinct, looks really professional. Nice headings there, nice content, loads of good action verbs and phrases, and well populated. The one on the right, our Jerry Lee, is the one we're aiming for. Expressing skills. Skills are really important in a CV, and expressing them good business language. So as you can see here, multitasking, communication, organizational skills, critical thinking, interpersonal, flexibility, detail orientation, teamwork. Making sure that the skills that are in your CV are the ones that are in the job spec, and in order of that. So reflecting the job spec. And good action verbs. If you're talking about the job or the experience you're having at the moment, you talk about them in the present tense, and otherwise, if it's something in the past tense. So making sure that you have, again, good action verbs and phrases. Loads of resources on the web, don't be short. Google and find out what are the ones that people will be looking for. Remember, often it's not a human vetting your CV, particularly in larger organizations. It could be a piece of software, and the software is set up to identify key skills and experience and knowledge in your CV. So if it's not seeing them, you're going to be rejected in terms of your application. So you want to be in that running for the interview and not out of it. It's a numbers game, as I said earlier. So even we might not be talking about percentages or bold numbers, as it were, but certainly, you know, showing your achievements, showing that you've got targets and you've made targets and evidence of what you've done, evidence of how you have performed. So degree awarded 2.1, 2.2, whatever. Employee of the month, highest customer service ratings, achieved a 15% increase in sales, and we can read through the rest of them. So the idea being here that obviously somebody will recruit you on the basis of the evidence that you provide in your CV and your cover letter or your application form. If the evidence isn't there of your performance and your track record, well, then that's going to leave them wondering. So, and particularly in relation to that software, screening software that I mentioned, if your CV is being run through that, it's certainly going to be looking for numerical or performance evidence for your experience to date. And lastly, standing out, and any of those of you who have been to any of my presentations in the libraries will know that I'm very fond of this image. It's a lovely red apple in the middle of a box of green apples. And what it says is basically make sure that you're the red apple in the box. You want to be the person, the candidate that stands out above and beyond all of the others. How do you do that? Obviously making sure in terms of content, layout, nice clear font, you know, Verdana, Open Sans, Arial, something that's really easy to read, particularly for a reader who might have a specific learning difficulty or some sort of a visual impairment. Really important that your CV is clear and easy to read. Secondly, in terms of the content, that you have got just great content there, that you have identified and shown evidence of how you meet all of the requirements of the job specification. But lastly, I call it applicant gold. What are the things that you can point to that will make you distinct, help you to engage at a psychological and emotional level with the person recruiting you and looking at your CV? And that could be things like something in your interests and achievements, that is, you know, your volunteering work, some personal skills that you have, that you've developed maybe on a sports field or through school or community group. And also things in your personal statement. So that statement of narrative that we said appears at the top of the CV under your personal details, you can use that to help your CV stand out. So making sure that you're memorable, putting the highlight on all your great experience and knowledge, and showing the recruiter that really there is no way they can leave you on the subs bench. They want to be bringing you forward to the first team, and hopefully to working with them in their business or their organization. So that's it, folks. I hope you found that really useful. Again, if you would like the template I mentioned, by all means, reach out to me here at my email address or on LinkedIn. And remember that you can get lots of other fantastic presentations from Blanchardstown Library on their YouTube channel.